In the summer of 1776, the newly declared United States stood closer to collapse than most of its leaders were willing to admit. George Washington's army was young, poorly clothed, and chronically short of powder and food. Across the water from Manhattan, the largest expeditionary force Britain had ever sent to North America was unloading men, artillery, and supplies with methodical confidence. Redcoats and Hessian mercenaries filled the roads. Warships dominated the harbor. Washington could see almost everything that moved in the open. What he could not see were the intentions behind those movements. He knew New York was the hinge on which the Northern War would turn. Whoever controlled its port controlled the flow of reinforcements and provisions for hundreds of miles. Yet every plan he formed rested on incomplete information. Scouts brought fragments, deserters brought rumors. Nothing arrived with the certainty a commander needed when the survival of the entire cause hung in the balance. The result was a campaign of forced withdrawals, midnight evacuations, and near disasters. More than once, the Continental Army slipped away from destruction by hours rather than by design. Washington understood that fortune of that kind could not be counted on indefinitely. The army did not need another stirring speech or another desperate bayonet charge. It needed knowledge taken from inside the enemy's own lines, accurate counts of regiments, the condition of their magazines, the timing of their next advance. That requirement forced a hard conclusion. If the revolution was to continue, it would have to fight a second war, one conducted without uniforms, without drums, and without the protection of the laws of war. Discovery in that quieter conflict meant the rope, not the honorable wound of the battlefield. Recruiting people willing to accept that risk was never simple. Most patriots preferred to face the enemy in daylight. The work demanded men and women who could live unnoticed among the occupation forces, who could listen without appearing to listen, and who could disappear into ordinary routines the moment suspicion arose. The individuals who eventually stepped forward were not celebrated officers or well-known radicals. They were people whose daily lives already gave them reason to move through the occupied zone. A farmer who brought produce to market, a merchant who kept accounts with both Whig and Tory customers, and a boatman who knew every tide and sandbar of the Sound.
In the autumn of 1778, Major Benjamin Talmadge, a Long Island native serving as a cavalry officer, laid a proposal before Washington. Rather than send solitary agents on dangerous one-way errands, create a lasting chain in which each person performed only one function. A captured link would not expose the rest. Washington authorized the experiment and placed Talmadge in charge of building it. Talmadge began with men he had known since boyhood. Abraham Woodhull, a Setauket farmer of cautious temperament, agreed to observe British activity on Long Island and, when necessary, to enter the city itself. Inside New York, Robert Townsend, a reserved merchant with useful commercial ties, began frequenting the coffee houses and counting rooms where British officers and Loyalist traders spoke freely about shipments, shortages, and planned expeditions. Caleb Brewster, a tough and experienced boatman, accepted the most physically hazardous role, ferrying the written reports across Long Island Sound at night to Continental posts in Connecticut. Talmadge remained on the American side of the water, receiving the dispatches, evaluating them, and deciding what should reach the commander-in-chief. The system rested on layers of concealment. Each principal figure used an alias. Woodhull wrote as Samuel Culper. Townsend signed as Culper Jr. Talmadge answered to John Bolton. Washington appeared in the correspondence only as the number 711. Messages were often written in invisible ink that remained blank until treated with the proper chemical. A shared codebook replaced names of places, ranks, and common terms with numbers. Couriers and sources rarely met. Dead drops and prearranged signals reduced the chance of accidental exposure. On the Setauket shore, the hanging of laundry in a particular pattern could tell Brewster whether the landing was safe that night. These measures were not romantic inventions. They were the practical difference between continued service and a public hanging. The work itself was rarely dramatic. Woodhull recorded the arrival of fresh battalions, the state of earthworks, the prices of forage, and the temper of the garrison. Townsend moved through the city as a man of business, noting conversations about powder stores, the sailing dates of frigates, and the destinations of marching columns. Brewster waited for darkness and favorable water, then crossed the open sound with the folded papers hidden in his clothing, knowing that a single patrol vessel could end the night. The reports that finally reached Washington's headquarters were dry, factual, and invaluable. They bought time, the one commodity the Continental Army could never afford to waste. One of the clearest proofs of that value arrived in 1780. French troops under the Comte de Rochambeau had just come ashore in Rhode Island to strengthen the American side. British commanders in New York prepared a swift blow intended to smash the newcomers before they could dig in. Intelligence passed through the network revealed enough of the plan for Washington to adjust his dispositions and present a credible threat of reinforcement. The British abandoned the stroke. The alliance, still tested and politically fragile, survived. Without that warning, the strategic balance of the later war might have shifted permanently against the United States. Other reports helped the Army avoid ambushes, conserve dwindling stocks of powder, and choose the safer moment to march or to stand still. The British remained confident that their control of the city and the surrounding waters gave them the advantage in knowledge. They never fully understood that a handful of civilians was watching them within their own perimeter and sending what they saw across the water in carefully coded form. The strain on the agents never lifted. Woodhull lived with the knowledge that a single careless remark or an intercepted letter could bring a patrol to his farm. Townsend maintained the outward manner of a loyal subject while quietly recording everything of military interest. Brewster risked capture or drowning on every crossing. None of them received pay that matched the danger. None expected public thanks. Their continued usefulness depended on remaining unknown even to most of their fellow Americans. When the fighting ended in 1783, the members of the network simply returned to the lives they had set aside. There were no parades, no official citations, and no pensions granted for their particular service. Their names stayed hidden inside coded letters and faded notebooks for decades. Only much later did historians reconstruct the full reach of what they had done. The methods they refined, division of labor, numerical codes, invisible writing, and controlled courier routes, would surface again in later intelligence services. The people themselves went back to fields, ledgers, and boats.
Their decisive contribution was not one spectacular revelation. It was the steady, unglamorous accumulation of facts that allowed an outnumbered and undersupplied army to remain in the field through years when it might easily have dissolved. The revolution demanded courage in open battle. It also demanded another kind of courage from those who accepted the constant possibility of the gallows so that the army might know in time where the next danger lay. History has always preferred the visible drama of generals and massed ranks. It has been slower to notice the farmer scanning the roads, the merchant lingering over a cup of coffee while officers talked too freely, and the boatman pulling at the oars in darkness with folded papers against his chest. They asked for no monuments. Their success was measured by a simpler standard. The cause they served did not die in the years when death was the more probable outcome. In the end, the American Revolution was shaped by determination, foreign help, endurance, and skill on the battlefield. It was also sustained by information gathered at personal risk by people who never expected their names to be remembered. That hidden labor did not win the war alone. Without it, however, the war might never have been won.